Hi, I'm Rajnish.
And I'm Bridget,
Welcome to TerreScience.
the podcast where reality matters.
Hi, I'm Rajnish Khanna, and it's my pleasure today to have Dr. Paul Syltie with us. Paul is lead of research, a vice president at Vital Earth Resources, and I've known Paul for I think 5 years or more, and I've had wonderful conversations with him about agriculture, the current state, and what is needed. And today we will talk about Vitazyme, which is a product of Vital Earth Resources. And Dr. Paul Syltie heads the research at for Vitazyme. So, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you.
So, before we get started, Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get started with working with Vitazyme?
Well, it started back in my graduate degree days when I was looking for some way that I thought I could really help take care of some of the major problems agriculture is facing. And of course, we're facing many problems today. And I wanted to be a part of the solution, not to continue the problem. And since I tend to think outside the box, I gravitated towards biostimulants, which was a very new and novel way of treating crops. So when I achieved my doctor's degree in 1980, I decided to dabble into the area of biostimulants. And in spite of the fact that all the forces around me, including my advisor, did not really recommend this because it was a new area. Many of the experts in the field of soil fertility thought that biostimulants were snake oil. They weren't worth anything. They were useless to look at. But I thought differently because in my initial trials with biostimulants, I found that they worked very well. I did those on my own, and I stepped into the field of biostimulants in 1980. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've worked with biostimulants. Well, it's been now for over 40 years. It's been a most excellent, interesting adventure, and it's proving to be a highly effective one because now we see biostimulants being accepted and acknowledged as really very profitable for the farmer and becoming standard practice for in many areas. So very happy to have been brought into this area of research and use within academia and the farm community, and all the misgivings in the past I think have been pretty much overcome as we've gone into these years.
So, Paul, just for some of our listeners who may not know what biostimulants are, maybe you can tell us just a simple definition. How are they different from like a regular fertilizer?
Well, biostimulants are generally it's kind of a potpourri of materials, including various humic acids, fulvic acids, amino acids. In the case of Vitazyme, it's brassinosteroids and triacontanol, substances that usually are liquid, not always, but usually, that are applied at very low concentrations to amplify the effect of the nutrients that a farmer normally does apply. So you put this on top of the normal farm program and try and enhance it. So it's just a very kind of a catch-all area that includes, like I said, materials that are applied at very low levels. For instance, with Vitazyme, we apply only about, in terms of brassinosteroid applications, about 10 milligrams per acre, which is next to nothing. So it takes very, very little to do a big job.
Yes, and like we have discussed in the past, and i-Cultiver, which is my company that provides R&D, and we have actually tested Vitazyme with the brassinosteroid, and it does take very little amount, and you apply it on the leaf. And what you bring up is very interesting and important, that the small amount is very effective in assimilating or increasing the efficiency of nutrient assimilation and many other aspects that a plant normally has to deal with in the environment. So tell us a little bit of a history of Vitazyme. How long has it been around, and what crops it's been used on, and how can people get to know more about it?
Well, the history of Vitazyme is very, very interesting. It was developed actually in the 1980s by a doctor from Dallas, Texas. He was a medical man, but he was interested in agriculture and biology. So he started dabbling with various substances and came up with a fermentation product that he thought might work, and indeed it did. In the initial trials, it did very well, but it was not really commercially utilized until the mid 90s. I came with Vital Earth in 1995, and that's when the research really began. Before that time, there were a few on-farm trials that were done. They looked to be very promising. But in 1995, we began, that's when I came with the company. We began a very progressive and dedicated effort to research this product to death, you might say. We really wanted to get the data accumulated to show just how it can work with all kinds of crops. And we started compiling research data at that time in 1995. And since then, we've accumulated about 1,400 research trials from various universities, third-party research, and now we're working with you, of course. And farmers, most of these are replicated, and they have shown, from university trials, for instance, that this material really does work. Not only works, but it works really well in virtually all crops and all climates, soil conditions, and because of the brassinosteroids, it is very good at stress reduction in the crop, which is critical, for getting the yields and the quality of the crop that you need.
Yes, and when you and I met, I think it was at the World Ag Expo in 2017, I believe, and we discussed brassinosteroids. And as it happens, I collaborate with Professor Xiong Wang at the Carnegie Institution, who leads the research in brassinosteroids. And so let's talk a little bit about what are brassinosteroids and why they are important, and why were they included in Vitazyme. So brassinosteroids, as the name suggests, are steroids. So what do we know?
Correct. They are steroids. They have a cholesterol nucleus. Let me first begin by saying that when we manufacture Vitazyme, it's a proprietary process. It's not patented, so you can't go down to the patent office and find out, what we do. But it's a combination of various grains and microorganisms, some legumes, and together through a fermentation process, the brassinosteroids and the tricontinol and other components are generated. So that's how it's made. As far as the effects of the brassinosteroids, well, the list is long and it's growing. Dr. Wang, I'm sure, could elucidate more on that than I could. But the primary effect of brassinosteroids is to improve stress tolerance. And that includes, tolerance to drought, to heat, to cold, to disease, to nutrient stress, just a whole array of situations. But that's just one effect. It has many others, and that includes just a general improvement in plant growth, the nutrient content of the crop. I think you found that in some of your tomato trials. The effect on carrot, lycopene, for instance, and certain other components. It's a stimulator of photosynthesis, protein synthesis, disease resistance, cell membrane activity. I could go through a whole list. Stomata numbers
Mm-hmm.
in the leaves are very closely related to brassinosteroids, and of course they're essential for the formation of the pollen tube during germination. It's also involved in pesticide breakdown. So that's something we've noticed in our trials at the University of Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
With Dr. Kramer, we've done work for many years and found that we can reduce the levels of glyphosate, for instance, in the soil, as well as improve the structure of the microbes in the rhizosphere being the root zone. And we've normalized that. In fact, more than normalized it with using Vitazyme, even mixed with glyphosate. We can overcome the negative effects that many people are not aware of when you apply that herbicide, and as well as other herbicides, and normalize the microbiota in the root zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, all these things, how can brassinosteroid, or how we call it BR, can do all of this? And so one of the mechanisms that that are known is that brassinosteroids are hormones. They act like hormones, and they activate gene expression inside the plant cells. So there is a whole signaling cascade of events that occur. And a lot of this has been studied in young seedlings, and the pathway is quite well studied. So one of the experiments that we did to test whether Vitazyme actually indeed had brassinosteroid was to take a mutant that does not make a plant mutant, that lacks the genes that make brassinosteroid, and we tested it under the conditions where BR should be, or brassinosteroid should be, active. And indeed, we were able to rescue the mutant plant with Vitazyme, which means that Vitazyme did have brassinosteroid activity. So we confirmed that in our recent study. So this is why I wanted to invite you and discuss more about, because as far as I know, there aren't many products, or at least that I know of, that include brassinosteroids. This is a unique product, Vitazyme. And we have tested brassinosteroid-based Vitazyme on tomatoes and shown an increase in yield, and like you were mentioning, also in lycopene pigment production. And all of this work is being put together for publication, and we'll put links to some of the reports that are currently available below in the description. But this is amazing. So brassinosteroids as signaling molecules, so you don't need too much of it. And really, like you said, they're also involved in degradation of larger chemicals, basically, which could be through microbes. So what do you think is one of the key factors that helps through Vitazyme in increasing yield? Is it brassinosteroids, or do you think some of the other components also play a role?
Well, I think brassinosteroids are the primary compounds that are doing the work, but I think 1-triacontanol, which is a 30 carbon straight chain alcohol, which has been proven, especially in Michigan State University studies, Dr. Reese, years ago, that is also involved because that's known to improve photosynthetic activity in plants. But I think brassinosteroids hold the primary cause. We also have, though, certain glycosides that we haven't characterized. There are also some B vitamins, vitamin B1, B2, and also B6. We know that they're present there, and they're very active in various effects, on plant growth. And there also are certain enzymes we have characterized, studies on the East Coast at the university. So we know we have quite an array of compounds that are doing the work. We don't know which ones perhaps are more active than others in doing certain effects. We're triggering, the genetics of the plant to do its job. But we have quite I would call it a well-balanced array of compounds. I call them growth regulators more than hormones. But they're doing quite an amazing job. And if you go through our research, a lot of which we have on our website, you can see some of the effects we
Right.
have. We have a good part of those 1,400 trials there, and
Right. Right.
so it's been quite amazing, me as a researcher to see what such a small amount can do to in such a wide array of effects.
Yes, and just important to point out that Vitazyme is not a nutrient-based product, so there is no nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, at least in terms of fertilizer components. So it's not a nutrient-based product. It's actually sort of like an enzymatic and, like you said, growth-promoting signaling molecules that activate different pathways within the plant that then allows the plant to sort of assimilate and adjust to its environment. And so my guess is that we haven't done this directly, but we can certainly test. Have any other studies been done under stress like drought or disease with Vitazyme?
Yes, they have. We don't have them sorted as such in our database. We could do that, but yes, we have done research in these areas. One effect that has been noteworthy has been effects on hail, from hail damage. Hail just knocks the smithereens out of a plant.
Yeah.
And we have a study actually done this last year in Ukraine that showed really fine recovery from mid-season loss of about 50% of the canopy. About half the leaves were knocked off, and the recovery was quite amazing. We did some work also on a trial in the University of Missouri with corn, where corn was severely damaged by a hailstorm. It was a replicated trial, and Vitazyme pulled the crop out very well in that stress condition. But we have other trials done under disease stress, nutrient stress, various other types of stress, and the results have been uniformly very good.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's one of the things that I liked about Vitazyme when we were doing the trials, that it's easy to apply. So it's a liquid, and like you said, it's very small amounts, so it's diluted. Then it's a foliar application with some application to the soil. So basically, applying it to the whole plant, and we were applying it from the early start, maybe after germination, through to flowering time. So it was what we did was every other week with a small amount. I think that seems to be fairly easy to do, but can one also use it on like tree crops or larger crops?
Yes, it certainly can. In fact, I don't think there's hardly been a crop that's grown around the world that has not been used on. A lot of it is used on tree fruit. In New York State, for instance, on apples, cherries, pears. In Brazil, and especially in Chile, it's used on fruit crops, cherries a lot, and grapes in Chile. If you eat grapes imported from Chile in the winter, it's very possible that they've been treated with Vitazyme because it works very well, and it improves ripening. It improves the quality of the crop. Higher bricks, better skin strength, so that you don't have splitting so much. Longer storage life on the shelf. With strawberries, there were some studies done in Mexico that showed that, and this is quite phenomenal. There were pictures taken from the time the strawberries were put into the store, and then as you go along day by day, how they tend to deteriorate, get mold on them. Well, it's amazing to see how Vitazyme was able to, because of the treatments and the effect on the quality, to reduce the time or to increase the time that the strawberries stayed good, so that for the store owner, that was very important.
So the shelf life, and there are certain areas that'll be very interesting to explore in the future, and that's one of them. So one of the things that we know that brassinosteroids may be involved in is plant architecture. So it's conceivable that more cell wall or more protective growth occurred around the fruit. but these things, can be tested as well. So that's interesting that the shelf life was increased, even though the treatment was probably done to the plant, not directly to the strawberries, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
If the cell wall strength is increased, of course, shelf life is going to be improved,
yeah.
and that's been proven. We have quite a bit of research to bear that out, especially in tree fruits.
Mm-hmm.
But also on potatoes, the same thing there. The storage life is improved there, extended. In the state of Maine, for instance, which is a big potato growing state, we've gotten some excellent results in terms of storability. So there's just a wide array of effects that have been all very positive to growers, and that to me is very exciting, and I'm very happy to be involved in this kind of work.
Yeah, and I'm also been very interested in it because ever since we started working with it, we've seen benefits to the crop performance, and now we are starting to understand a little bit more about its mode of action. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And like we discussed, it's not a nutrient supplement; it's actually a stimulant, like you mentioned, or a growth promoter or growth regulator, and so it clearly interacts or talks to the plant directly and also to the microbes. So it seems to impact plant gene expression, genes that are inside the plant when they're expressed, and those genes then ultimately affect plant growth and development in its given environment. So the plant at all times is regulating what genes are being expressed, whether it's time to fruit, whether it's time to flower, whether it's time to turn off due to stress. So brassinosteroid seems to be helping the plant by stimulating through signaling and through regulating genes. So one of the things that you mentioned, Paul, was photosynthesis. Have there any studies been done to study the impact of brassinosteroids or Vitazyme on photosynthesis?
Yes, in the sense that we have done many studies to measure the levels of chlorophyll in the leaves of, say, treated versus an untreated area, or right next to one another, just one row apart, even like in a cornfield or soybean field. And we nearly always get a bump up in the level of chlorophyll in the leaves. So we know we're getting a very good response, in terms of chlorophyll or chloroplast development. And that really, in my view, and I think this is proven out in our research, that's the main mode of action of this. And this translates into the what I call rhizosphere activation. Maybe I should take a moment and just explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
And that is that if you increase chlorophyll production, you increase photosynthesis, you're bringing in more CO2 into the plant, more sunlight is being captured. Well, that energy, of course, is translated into carbon compounds, sugars, eventually starches, and that goes into different metabolic cycles that produce amino acids and so forth. And a lot of that energy is transmitted down the stem in the phloem into the root, and it grows more roots, but it also excretes a lot of that energy actually onto the root surfaces. So it's actually going into the soil. That's how plants normally work. What we're seeing is that we're enhancing that because we're bringing in more energy from the sun into the root zone. And believe it or not, up to 40-45% of the energy that plant takes in can go there onto those root surfaces. It's an incredible process.
Right, and yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Just to complete the idea here, that energy is put there by the plant for a good purpose. And the purpose is to feed the microbes, the fungi, the bacteria, the actinomycetes, the protozoa, all these other critters, and especially mycorrhiza fungi, which are symbiotic fungi that make their connection to the root and go out into the soil and actually bring back a lot of nutrients, especially the immobiles like phosphorus and zinc and copper and so forth. That's the major reason that phosphorus is taken up, by the way, through the mycorrhiza. That process enables the conversion of more nutrients into available form, which is the major way that plants take up nutrients. So we have that
Yes.
enhancement, which can explain a lot of the effects we see with increased growth and stress tolerance in the plant.
Right. And what I was going to mention was that we are finding this on a number of occasions with certain biostimulants. And that's a very plausible and likely scenario that you just described, which is to increase photosynthesis and carbon capture. So the two implications, big implications of what you just said, are not just what you're also, talking about microbiomes, but another aspect of it is carbon capture, right? So we talk about carbon sequestration a lot because we want to save the planet and CO from CO2, and sequestration is in the soil. But another aspect of this is capturing that carbon, CO2, through photosynthesis. And if you have more chlorophyll and you're doing more photosynthesis, the plant is actually capturing more CO2 as well, in addition to what you described very, very nicely about making the sugars that then go down to the root zone. And then that sugar is sent out by the plant to recruit more bacteria and better microbiome environment, which certainly makes sense for then ultimately for the plant performance to increase. So this pathway is very exciting and interesting, and we'll be working on dissecting or understanding how exactly this pathway works in 2023.
Right, and we appreciate your help. You're doing this work. This is, I think, really excellent. We really want to understand in as much detail as possible the mode of action. How this works, because the more we understand about this, the better we can recommend to farmers how to use it, the timing, the amount to add, and every other part about using it. The more we understand how it works, the better we can advise farmers who are, their ultimate user. That's why we're here. I mean, to help the
Yes,
farmers.
and on that note, I would like to also bring up some of the benefits that the farmers may realize from this. So you mentioned glyphosate breakdown. So if there is a glyphosate accumulation in the soil, that can be broken down. Maybe reduction in fertilizer use. What kind of benefits do you think the farmers can realize from it?
Yes, well, you mentioned two of the main ones that we're looking at today in this modern time when fertilizer prices are going through the roof. I mean, literally, they're just really increasing, like urea to the farmers tripled in price virtually the last year and a half, and other nutrients are also increasing in price. We are presently researching the effect of Vitazyme, as we have for years past, but especially now, the effect of the brassinosteroids on fertilizer efficiency. If we can better utilize the nutrients that are applied, then the farmer doesn't have to apply as much. And in fact, in studies, going back 20 years or more, we've seen this effect, and we've researched it the years since then. We can reduce the applications of nitrogen, for instance, by in some cases 50%. We don't recommend that to everybody, but if the soil is in good condition, if there's some residual nitrogen there, and the previous crop has been, say, a legume or not a really nitrogen intensive use type crop like corn, we can get by with reducing that application of nitrogen by at least 25% and still get the same yield, sometimes greater yields. And we've seen that in research we did this past year in 2022 on corn and cotton. So this is a real effect, and it's really exciting to me because you're helping the farmer, on his bottom line. At the same time, using a program that's totally non-toxic. I mean, it's environmentally friendly, it's easy to use, and all you do is just add it to what you're doing. It's so simple.
Right. That's great. And you will be at the World Agricultural Expo this year in February.
I will be, yes. I will be there along with our company president and some other people. And we're really happy to be able to be there, and hopefully can see you there as well.
Yes, we will also be there. So if anyone who's listening, if they have more questions, they can always find you there if they go to the World Ag Expo, and they can visit either Vital Earth Resources or i-Cultiver. We will be there as well to answer any further questions. So, Paul, would you like to add anything else to this discussion?
Well, there are so many things I guess I could talk about because I love agriculture, and I grew up on the farm. I grew up on a dairy farm in western Minnesota, and I really want to stay close to agriculture. That's my first love as far as vocation is concerned. And I stayed in agriculture all through my university days. I attended at the University of Minnesota, University of Illinois, and then North Dakota State University, and majoring in soils in all of these institutions. And just very happy to be able to, give back to farmers some of the things I know and understand that I realize can help them. I mean, we're in this business to serve the farmer, and we're really at Vital Earth anyway. We're excited about being able to help the farmer in terms of his bottom line, but also improve the soil conditions. One thing I haven't talked about is the effect of this program on soil conditions. As a soil scientist, this is really critical for me because we have noticed, and I've noticed this ever since I've been working with biostimulants for over 20 years, or over 40 years, I'm sorry. And that is that when you use these biostimulants, they tend to improve the structure of the soil, which is really important for the infiltration of water, the movement of air in and out of the soil. If you don't have that in proper order, you can't expect very good yields. But this effect is extremely important. So if we can improve structure, which is the cleavage planes where the water and air move, then you've done a lot to improve crop yield and enhance the overall ecosphere, of the earth. And we're talking about improving, like you say, carbon sequestration. This is a big part of that as well.
So by structure, you're referring to compactness and moisture retention capacity, how much water the soil can hold, and so I can see this can be impacted by microbial activity and fungal growth, and which we already discussed that might be impacted by brassinosteroids and Vitazyme. So yes, I mean there are some effects on soil that one can envision, which can maybe allow the soil to hold more moisture because of a more organic material, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I didn't, I guess, explain fully, why we get this increased, improved structure, and that is because of the exudates from the microbes themselves. The microbes produce polysaccharides primarily to actually create the structure. That's how it's created, and you get, because of the increased rhizosphere activity, more microbes working, better. The mycorrhiza are extending out from the root into the soil. That helps a lot to produce this structure, to produce these cleavage planes that enable the soil to absorb the water greater, faster with rainfall or irrigation, and also to allow the air to move more effectively.
Right, and one thing that comes to my mind, which I think we can easily also check with Vitazyme, we've done some other studies with some other biostimulants, and one thing that we found was with the roots. Many times, you see pictures, growers are comparing small root with this very large root, and a lot of times the above ground plant does not look that great, but the roots are very long, and those are because the plant is trying to look for water. So many times people show these comparisons, and it's funny to me because they're just looking at increased growth, but they're not realizing why that increased growth is. What we have seen is when the kind of soil structure that you mentioned, plants tend to have more surface roots to increase absorption, not that much. And if there is enough moisture, the plant root does not have to go that far deep, and the root structure may not be that long with a good biostimulant, but it may be more biomass, more surface area, more thinner secondary roots. We've seen this with other things. So this is another thing that we can probably also check. But it's very interesting, and I think it's all related, like you said, to photosynthesis, because ultimately it's the capturing of energy from the sun and converting it into sugars, and then transporting that into the soil. So it sounds like a really important thing that we need to consider and work towards, because currently our agriculture system needs to rethink the approach for a better environmental products, right? And I think Vitazyme certainly seems to fit that.
Well, I certainly concur with that. And just to add what you were saying, invariably, if you examine the roots of plants that have been treated with Vitazyme versus those that have not, everything else being equal, you'll see a great improvement in rooting. As you say, especially the fine root hairs, but also the mycorrhizal network. And this is it's invariably noticed when we dig up plants to show the farmer, or when researchers look at this. We have also documentation of root mass from different places, root mass effects. So indeed, this is a big part of the response.
Great. Well, good. Well, this has been a good educational discussion about Vitazyme, and hopefully, our goal is to tell people who grow not only in farms but also in their houses, wherever they're practicing good farming, to use environmentally healthy products. And we as i-Cultiver, we are an independent research and development company. We provide R&D to our collaborators, and with peer-reviewed publications. So anything that we do or whatever we do is submitted for peer-reviewed publications. So it's not just things that we are talking about or making up. We want to test and examine the mode of action, which we'll be doing a lot of in 2023, which I'm excited to work with you, Paul. And I've known you for 5 years, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you again for coming on to the podcast and sharing what you know about Vitazyme with all of us.
It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Two things that motivate me are the beauty of our environment, the uniqueness of our planet, of course, but also the people I've met, and the fact that people do want to play a stewardship role.
Welcome to TerreScience,
the podcast where reality matters.
I thought microtubules might be processing information at this basic level. Here we are, another 30 years later.
I can actually say it. I'm going to be a scientist.
Excellent, you will be.
What was fascinating is what emerged from that was also a transformation in their consciousness.
If I try to do that, we're going to go down that rabbit hole.
Because I wrote it for people like you to get a sense of field biology, for women to appreciate the challenges.
In that process of detection, that molecule momentarily is bound to us. It becomes part of us. So it's this incredibly intimate encounter that we have with the things of the world around us.
We are consistently asking what's wrong with the student rather than what's wrong with the educational system today.
Maybe somebody will be inspired to also go into this field someday too. That would be amazing.
Well, I hope so.
Welcome to the TerreScience podcast.
The podcast where reality matters.
My name is Rajnish. I'm a plant scientist at Carnegie Institution at Stanford University and an entrepreneur attempting to upgrade our food systems and our planetary footprint for the benefit of Earth and humanity.
And my name is Bridget. I'm a current graduate student and former vertical farmer, and I'm very passionate about public education and increasing access to healthy and nutritious foods. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube under TerreScience, or follow the links in the description below to learn more. We'll see you in the next one.